And if you'll excuse me, I realized I felt sad that I needed to use my notes so much when I talk, but I don't know if it's age. I don't know if there's just a lot of facts when it comes to talking about the Eightfold Path, but I really feel that I need to do that. So I want to ask for your acceptance. Then I'll be doing some of that. But I want to begin with a joke. And you can tell me it's okay if you've heard this before. It just might be that you've heard the joke about the man who's in a flood. And he's a very devout man. And he's getting washed away by the flood. And he's climbing in a tree and clinging to this tree for life. And he's praying to God because he's so devout. Please, God, you have to save me. And while he's there clinging to the tree, this raft comes by and says, jump in, we'll save you. And he says, oh, no, I'm praying to God and God will save me. You go on. And he's getting more terrified as this goes on. He continues to pray and plead with God to save him, but he can hardly hear himself over the sound of the helicopter that's coming by and dropping a basket down to save him. And they say, jump in. He said, no, God will save me. Well, the sad news is that the man was washed away by the flood and he died. And as he approached the pearly gates of heaven and said to God, why didn't you save me? I prayed just as you said I should. And God said, I sent you a raft. I sent you a helicopter. What were you waiting for? Now, I know it's an old one, but I think it's a goodie. But in a similar way, as I thought about this Eightfold Path, I thought, Buddha handed us the keys to our liberation. He said, this is what you need to do for your awakening. And to some extent, we pick it up. And through our lives, we feel the effects of this practice. We feel a little freer, a little more open, a little happier. But sometimes I question, am I really picking up these instructions that the Buddha offered? In his first sermon after he was awakened, and in the last sermon he gave before he died, and hundreds of times in the 45 years in between, he taught about the Four Noble Truths. That there's suffering, the cause of suffering is clinging, that we can end suffering by letting go of this clinging, and that there's an eightfold path that will lead to our awakening. And he said, I teach about suffering and the end of suffering. And he described the path as if suffering is the disease, then the path is the cure. It's the treatment for our disease. But any more than we would get better when we get a prescription for an antibiotic if we don't take it, the same goes for the prescription of the Eightfold Path. In order to really feel the effects of this course of treatment that can lead us to happiness and awakening, we need to pick it up and bring it into our lives. So this teaching isn't meant to just be a list that we listen to or to be memorized and put aside. This is a teaching that's intended to be brought into our daily lives. Buddha's guidance is that lovely word, I think it's ehipassiko, inviting investigation. And the Buddha says that we should try this on for ourselves and see what's true for us. And this talk is about trying on the Eightfold Path and seeing what is true for you. So in his book, Gregory Kramer describes the Eightfold Path as a whole life path. It's the name of that book. And And it's a path that involves understanding each of the 8 path factors in this path, and then taking them on as practice, a practice that we do in our individual practice, perhaps in our relationships, and how we relate to the world. And I know you're familiar with many of these path factors and probably have studied the Eightfold Path many times before. But this is such an integral teaching that we thought that it would be wise to bring it up and to consider and contemplate the Eightfold Path in its entirety, and to really think about how it's expressed in our lives. So we're beginning a series of talks on the Eightfold Path, and this will be the first, the introduction to the path factors. And between now and the beginning of March, with some other topics interspersed in between, we intend to cover each of the path factors. And the teachers will be Liz Reynolds next week, Teresa Miller the following week, and Anna Van Hoy is part of the teaching team. She'll teach in a couple of weeks later. And then I will talk, and each of us will talk about 2 of the path factors as we go through the series. And if you're interested, this is not going to be a book group, so the expectation isn't that you have to read a certain chapter and show up and talk about it. But if you're interested in any further background on the Eightfold Path, this book, A Whole Life Path by Gregory Kramer, is a nice resource. And the thing that I love about it is that it's just chock full of exercises, contemplations, things that you might want to do on your own or with a practice partner, or perhaps if you have a KM or a spiritual friends group to study with. So a path sounds like it could be fairly simple. I think we've all seen images of the path, these 8 stones leading into the woods. But an image that might fit a little better is to think of the 8 factors as the cords in a rope that are intertwined. They rely on one another. They form a strong, durable rope when they work together. And in the same way, the path factors need to intersect and support one another. Another image, and I'm going to ask if we can flip up that first slide and share it. There it is. The Dharma wheel, which is a classic image showing how all the factors work together. The Theravada monk Bhante Ji says, if you think of this wheel like a bicycle wheel, and if you just look at it and you hear the words and you just read about it, it's going to fall over from disuse. Instead, you have to ride the bicycle, and only when it's spinning and working together will its use benefit with the teachings of this path. So choosing to spin this bicycle or launch yourselves on this path, it's sort of a choice that of how we want to live our life, whether we want to try to live a life that reflects our aspirations, our intentions. It begins with wisdom, guided by an understanding and acceptance of things as they are, the natural nature of things and the truth. And trying to accept those truths that we're taught, things like impermanence, that are truths that we try to take on rather than fighting these truths and causing all kinds of consternation, frustration, and stress by trying to fight these truths. The path fosters a moral life that leads to goodness and harmony. The bliss of blamelessness, as Sharon would say in her 5 types of happiness. And when we're living a moral life, we can feel blameless and free. And then with wisdom and morality, our actions become more aligned with our aspirations, our intentions. So that's the goal of the path. And the idea of the path is not that we attain something or gain things. It's actually a process of relinquishing and giving up ignorance and craving, so that we can move to goodness and freedom. So peeling away ignorance with wisdom, peeling away unwholesomeness with moral behavior, and peeling away distraction and delusion with concentration and effort and wisdom. So the next slide is another image of the Eightfold Path, which is helpful. First, I'd just like to touch on the language of the path factors. We describe them as right view, right intention, right speech. And for some of us, that word right can be a bit of a clench, because when that Pali is translated into English as right, sometimes we have a reaction of, oh, it's moralistic, there's a right and a wrong. It doesn't always feel right to me. So consider there are other translations that may be a better fit, and particularly with some of the path factors. Like, how about if we talked about skillful speech? How about if we talked about wholesome actions or wise intentions? So all of those are also excellent ways to describe and to translate what was intended in the path, and you might want to choose to use those if they feel more right for you. Now notice in this path that there are 3 sets of factors. It begins with wisdom, and then there's an ethics and morality section of the path factors, and then concentration. However, this doesn't need to be a linear step-by-step process. We can really begin at any point, but this is how they're typically described. And they say that the wisdom factors can be considered both the destination we're headed to, and they're also the starting point, hence the circle. So with the wisdom factors, just to go over them, and then we're going to do a little exercise where we actually consider how they play out in our lives. With right view, we want to know where we're headed, our guiding star, or the truth that we believe. Right view is understanding the world in such a way that we can recognize what increases suffering now and in the future, and what reduces suffering or ends it. So it's the wisdom to view the world as it really is. And right intention, Kramer says, we might think of right view as a map showing the route to a desired destination. Right intention is the big decision to pick up that map, and it's also the choice to use the smaller choices at every intersection, to use that map to guide us, so that we have the intention of making choices that are wholesome versus unwholesome. The morality factors are the next section, and these, I might call them interchangeably, morality factors or the ethical factors. And we apply these to our interpersonal and social actions. So this is where the rubber meets the road, where we look at whether we're applying virtue to our decisions about our daily life. In our speech, is it timely, true, beneficial, and kind? And that includes our speech with loved ones, our communication to the world, and our self-talk. Are we kind? Right action asks whether each action I take leads to wholesome or unwholesome outcomes. Again, personally, interpersonally, and in society. It asks whether my actions are aligned with my intentions. Right livelihood is morality in its economic mode. Skillful and wholesome actions around how we spend our money and consume resources, avoiding work that harms us or others, and is there generosity in giving and how we act. So these morality factors free the mind from agitation and selfishness, and then we become more calm and stable. We're ready to turn the heart and mind to concentration, calm abiding, and insight. So the concentration factors, this is where we deal with the direct training of the mind. and it begins with right effort. Right effort energizes all of the path factors. It's the difference between aspiring to walk the path and actually making the effort to do it. This is the effort to change our personal habits and abandon the unwholesome. And the Buddha said that we should put forth extraordinary effort to change our habits, as if our hair were on fire. And then right mindfulness. Without it, we don't have the awareness to walk the path and choose moral action and choose wisdom. So we practice mindfulness to relinquish the unwholesome. And right mindfulness is mindfulness with a sense of purpose. And finally, right concentration is a mind that is calm and centered and collected. The moral life leads to tranquility, and tranquility leads to concentration and wisdom, which leads us back in that circular path to the wisdom factors, where right view is both the starting point and the destination. So we can flip that slide and come back and just have the screen of our Zoom friends. So the Buddha taught that truly engaging the Eightfold Path will lead us to the end of suffering, should we bring this path into the everyday moments of our lives. So Kramer says that a path held apart from the most intimate, the most normal, and the most humble moments of our lives, a path relegated exclusively to weekly groups, retreat centers, or nightstand reading, will lack the strength of impact needed to see through a lifetime of entanglement and encourage deep realization. The Noble Eightfold Path is meant to fully infuse the human experience. So what would it look like to contemplate our daily actions using these path factors, using them as a sort of a guidepost or a standard? And mind us, we need to do this while we're going to work and taking the kids to school and getting to our doctor's appointments. How might it look? It might lead to questions such as, what's most important in my life? And what are my day-to-day priorities? How do I spend my resources? What relationships do I prioritize? And are they wholesome? Do my choices reflect my values? And how's my quality of energy for my practice and for this path? It might feel overwhelming to try and contemplate applying this to every single path factor. So it might make sense to just pick a starting point. Perhaps we practice a particular factor for a week and try wise speech and see if we can only speak when we have something wise to say for a week. Perhaps we choose an area in our life where we want to apply these path factors, whether it's our communications or our intimate relationships. Or perhaps we choose a factor that we want to sit down and discuss with spiritual friends in a KM group or a study group. Really, how you enter the path arises from your life. If you think of it like a hiking trail, you have the choice, you have these markers on the trail, and you might decide that you want to do the whole 8-mile circuit, or you might decide you just want to do the blue loop for 1 mile. It really depends on what's speaking to you in your life right now. So in deciding where to begin on this map, it's skillful to ask, how is the path manifesting in my life right now? So which part of this is really important to me right now? So I'm going to share with you a reflection. It's one of the exercises that I pulled from Gregory Kramer's book, made some additions and shortened and changed it for our purposes. And as you leave, for those folks who are here, I did make a copy of the revised version I'm using tonight, and crediting Gregory Kramer, of course. And we will add a copy of that as well to the talk, the resources on the talk on the website for those who are not here in person. So this is when it might be nice to have your pen and paper handy. And we're going to go through this scan and ask you to consider, and the scan will look at each of the path factors with questions about each of the path factors. And I'm going to ask you to consider, which of these speak to you? Where do you feel called? Is there something that's needed or something that's workable right now? What's alive in my life right now? So the process is I'll read 3 or 4 questions about each of the path factors, and then I'll pause and just allow these questions to land. See if you can't touch into any reactions you may feel in the body, any feelings that come up, any thoughts. Just any of the factors, the questions that might resonate for you, that make you feel, something's needed there. Or, boy, that's what I want to run away from. And then just set that factor aside and listen to the next one. And I'll say the name of the factor at the beginning of the questions and the end, in case you want to jot down. Oh, right intention. That one's something I want to come back and visit. I may want to make it a point to come to that talk. So again, as I read them, just think, which of these speak to you? Where do you feel called? What's needed? And we'll begin with right view. Do I discern dissatisfaction and suffering and how I relate to it? How is my perspective affecting how I see things? Can I see how cause and effect operate? That's right view. Next is right intention. Can I sense the overarching direction of my life right now? What vows, commitments, or goals are orienting me right now? Am I oriented towards shedding or accumulating? And are my values and intentions aligned with my actions? That's right intention. Next is right speech. Is what I am about to say true, kind, and timely? Can I moderate my speech and become comfortable with silence? Do I refrain from gossip and divisive speech? And am I listening? That's right speech. Right action. Am I acting with care for others, creating safety and not harm? Am I acting wisely with sexuality and intoxicants? And what might the social and environmental impact of my actions be? That's right action. Right livelihood. Do my professional activities reflect my values? What's the impact of how I spend my resources? Is the practice of giving present in what I'm doing now? And how am I affecting my ecological footprint? That's right livelihood. Right effort. Am I bringing energy to the whole life path? What's my effort to abandon unwholesomeness like greed and aversion? What's my effort to cultivate the wholesome like gratitude and metta? And is this a time to intentionally cultivate patience, tranquility, concentration? That's right effort. Right mindfulness. What am I aware of? The body, the mind, feelings, phenomena? How am I aware? Internally and externally? Do I practice awareness during formal meditation on the cushion? How about throughout my daily life? It's right mindfulness. And finally, right concentration. Is the mind tranquil and gathered? Does the mind rest easily where I place it, or does it jump around? Can I experience a pleasant abiding in how things are right now? It's right concentration. So take a moment to let that settle and consider, do any of these factors speak to you as an area for further inquiry? So by digging into these factors in the Eightfold Path on these Tuesday evenings, we hope to become more familiar and practice with these factors that lead to our liberation, to goodness and freedom from suffering. Bhante Ji said the Buddha explained that dissatisfaction with the suffering of life is a burden. We cause our dissatisfaction by taking up the burden. We end it by putting it down. The path tells us how to unburden ourselves. So the invitation is to pick up the path at whatever marker is meaningful to you right now. Do you want to seek to clarify the direction for your life? Do you want to ensure that your speech is more kind and helpful in your relationships or your loved ones? Are you looking for a deepening of mindfulness through intentional practice? I invite you to just consider and to hop on this trail and walk through these factors with a goal of shedding your burdens and wearing out your hiking shoes. In a tricycle article called Letting Go, Judy Leaf said, "Our ego attachment is like a pair of shoes. Without such shoes, we wouldn't start out on the path. Although as we walk along, we find that our shoes begin to break down and wear away." Excuse me, I sneeze. So as you walk the path, the letting go happens naturally, just as your shoes wear away. You don't need to make a big dramatic statement about tossing them out. You just need to continue on. The path that initially seemed so inviting and accommodating slowly and surely begins to be more sandpapery and scrapes away tougher and tougher layers of leather. From beginning to end, the path of Dhamma is about letting go. So it's letting go of clinging, letting go of ignorance, letting go of suffering. And we invite you to join us on this journey. I'm going to finish here with a poem by Mark Nepo called Being Here. Transcending down into the ground of things is akin to sweeping the leaves that cover a path. There will always be more leaves. And the heart of the journey, the heart of our awakening, is to discover for ourselves that the leaves are not the ground, and that sweeping them aside will reveal a path. And finally, that to fully live, we must take the path and keep sweeping it.